You know, there's so much at stake right now. We talk about all the policies from the border to energy to bringing inflation down. Donald Trump really committed to all of this. How does one see this through? I want to give a plug for Dr. Kevin Roberts' book, Heritage Foundation, Don's Early Light. He's all about taking advantage of this opportunity right now to really bring Washington back to a place where we can be saving our country. He joins us right now. And Dr. Roberts, I've been telling everybody about your book, so I'm glad that you're here. For the last few weeks, I've just been saying, listen, you know, if you're looking for a good Christmas present, this is the one, because it really gets you thinking. Welcome to the program.
Well, it's always great to be with you. I can't thank you enough for plugging the book, for having me here. And ultimately what the book is about is how we return to a normal country.
There's a lot of things that you have proposed. I mean, let's start with the economy, just because that's sort of my wheelhouse first and foremost, and what's so important to me. This election really, it's a mandate from the American people saying we're tired of inflation, we're tired of regulation, we're tired of taxes, we're tired of big government acting like a blanket on everything that we want to do and that we can do. How do we start stripping that stuff away? I mean, is DOGE the answer? How do we actually incentivize government to do the right stuff?
DOGE is part of the answer. In fact, as you know from looking at the book, Trish, there are three channels or three opportunities we have to fix things. One of them is federal policy. DOGE is the key sort of tip of the spear there. But the second is making sure we're paying more attention to state and local policy, something that conservatives in D.C. too infrequently pay attention to. But then the third thing is we have to take greater responsibility in our individual lives, focusing on institutions like K through 12 schools and universities and local associations. My point is not to be dismissive toward the importance of DOGE, but to say we're making a mistake if we think that just if we get Washington out of our lives with good policy and cutting the budget and doing really good things like dismantling the U.S. Department of Education, which I call for, that's not going to be enough to harness the full potential of this realignment that Donald Trump personifies. In other words, if in fact, as I say in the subtitle, we're going to take back Washington to save America, one of the ways we make Washington less important, in addition to making it more efficient, is to spend a lot more time, frankly, being virtuous citizens, being great neighbors and friends, and also paying attention to state and local policy.
You know, state and local policy sort of being the foundation and the bedrock, if you would, of what this country in part was founded on, right? This autonomy and autonomy from Great Britain. You want to see states having the ability to really have that kind of self-control, that self-governance. One of the things that I think has gotten lost over the last however many years, and maybe it's in part because of academia, maybe it's in part because the government has gotten so swollen, was to get back to what you're saying on virtue and the importance of small community, family, church, the basic educational opportunities that we're offering at that early level for kids. What's happened? Like, why has that gotten so, I'm going to use an extreme term, but so poisoned, if you would, Dr. Roberts?
Over the last three generations, what the radical left has done, Trish, is march through our institutions. They've marched through the administrative state, turning it into something that's not just bloated, but now, of course, is dominated by the deep state. That's an institution that we have to reclaim through the work of Elon and Vivek and President Trump. But even, I would argue, more importantly than that, even though it's more subtle, is that the left has marched through institutions like our public schools, our universities, our professional associations, also an arena you know very well, our media outlets. And so part of the way that we can reclaim this country through our own virtuous decisions is to make sure that we're paying attention to those kinds of institutions that don't necessarily meet the eye when we're thinking about politics, and we're caught up in the legitimate euphoria about Trump's victory and the policy that's going to come. In other words, one of the reasons this has happened is because conservatives have been focused on their businesses, their families, their churches, the people who are right in front of them. They've also been focused on what's going on in Washington, D.C. By the way, I'm as guilty of this as anybody, so I'm not throwing a stone at anything but from a glass house, where we have paid a lot less attention And the reason why the left is taking advantage of this is on local and state politics. And so I think that the next generation or two of conservative reform needs to be just as focused on reforming schools, reforming universities, reforming state policy as it is on Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I think about it at the state level, and my mom was on the school board growing up, and I remember that so vividly, those late school board night meetings. But it's that commitment, I think, to community that you really need, and you need that from the ground up as opposed to top down, which, before you knew it, as we have seen over the last couple of years, suddenly parents were being labeled domestic terrorists because they were questioning some of the reading material that was on display, some of which was highly, highly inappropriate for young kids. You write in chapter 1, and I'm going to quote here, Dr. Roberts, to say that America's problems are spiritual requires no religious faith. It is an empirical statement. Tell me what you mean by that.
What I mean by that is, until 40 years ago, when we first saw the beginning of the dip of religiosity in this country, measured by church attendance and other measures, the United States was a very stable society. It was a very strong country. And of course, that's good too. Our military was strong. Our economy was healthy. Basically, by every objective measure, up until about the time of the Vietnam War, this country was strong. But something was happening in addition to that very explicit example of a decline in spirituality or religiosity. And that is what I'm getting at with this more secular understanding of what it is to be spiritual. And that is a belief in the goodness of this country. Some Americans even mean that when they use the phrase American dream. Some Americans mean that even when they use the word freedom. By that, just a certain hopefulness, a certain optimism about the future. And it really does speak to to use the broad definition of this term, the spiritual health of the country. In other words, although as a man of faith, I would like every American to be a person of faith, regardless of wherever they would go to church, it's important for us at least to understand that imprinted on our souls, imprinted in our nature, is a desire to be free. But that freedom is not the freedom to do whatever the heck we want, because that can happen or occur at the expense of other people. It's the freedom to do what we ought, to do the right thing, not just for ourselves, but for our countrymen. And we have to recapture that in this moment.
For whatever reason, sometimes, one feels like we're lost against society because there's a lot of pressure to be anti-American. That's what's cool and that's what's hip. And it's like, no. Let's make it cool and hip to be pro-America again. I don't entirely, Dr. Roberts, even understand the theory that's motivating the left when they do this, because on the one hand, they want to send more weapons, more money to Ukraine. They want to have a strong military presence. And on the other hand, it's like not cool, right, to be America. But it seems to me that if you want a strong military, which the left seems to want, you're also going to need some patriotism to accompany that. Otherwise, everybody's going to desert you in a time of need.
Boy, you put your thumb on one of the great contradictions of the radical left right now, or just the left generally, even the not so radical left. And that is that, to use your example of Ukraine, they want the United States to spend even more hundreds of billions of dollars there, which, by the way, is not very right-minded. But they want to do that because they see that as supporting not the sovereignty of the American nation state, but the continued construction of these supranational organizations like the United Nations. And, just think about 10 years ago, Trish, if you and I were having that conversation, people would say, wow, Reagan and Robert sound like they're pretty conspiracy theorists. No, this is the facts. I visit the continent of Europe often as the president of Heritage to try to rebuild conservatism there. And even there, where things are really bad, they understand that in order to resuscitate the conservative movement, you have to focus on the nation state. That's the thing that the left gets wrong. That's the thing that they want to end. They would rather the United States be sort of an equal member of the United Nations than each of us in the United States actually understand that our power, whether it's the foreign policy power you describe or the power that comes from a domestically stable society, comes from the sovereignty of this particular country. That's the thing that they disagree with.
Look, not to be crass, but hey, we'd all be speaking German, right? If it weren't for the United States of America. When you think back to the success of Ronald Reagan, do you see some parallels? Like you think about the the tough 70s and Jimmy Carter and everybody's kind of down. And then all of a sudden, Reagan comes in and ushers in this amazing time of optimism, and with that optimism came growth, in part because it's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? When it's like full steam ahead and everybody's gung-ho, you have better opportunities being presented your way.
The parallels between Reagan in the early 80s and Trump in the 2020s are really striking. I mentioned in the book that, like a lot of Americans, I had a difficult upbringing, really a result of the deterioration of institutions, something that we were talking about earlier. I'm not special because of that, but what I'm saying is that if I could achieve the American dream, which Lord knows I certainly have been able to do, then anyone can. And so this year, when, for example, Heritage was doing focus groups with all kinds of demographic segments. Mm-hmm. We were talking to poor Americans, working class Americans, middle class, of all ethnic backgrounds. What they kept saying was, in spite of all of the reasons we have to be discouraged about the future, we want to revitalize the American dream. And we don't care what Trump's personality is like. We don't care what he says on Truth Social or X. We want someone who's willing to take sacrifices for us. The parallels between him and Reagan are really overwhelming.
It's amazing. I mean, I love the book. I really want to encourage everybody to go out. Dawn's Early Light by Kevin Roberts. You can get this on Amazon, Dawn's Early Light, or wherever you buy your books. I mean, this is an important moment in time. We're on, I like to say, the front lines of history here every day. Dr. Kevin Roberts exploring it, how we all as a society can do better. Dawn's Early Light, go check it out today. Thank you so much for joining us, and Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. I'm looking forward to a great 2025.
Trish, you're the best. Thanks for everything you do. We are at the beginning of the golden era of this country.
I love it. Thank you so much. Congratulations on the book. Isn't that the truth? Right? Isn't that the truth? Like the golden era. Anyway, this is the book. You can go check it out. You can get it on Amazon or wherever you get your books. Dawn's Early Light.